Good evening. It is 5:30 according to Verizon time, so we're going to call the work session to order. Remind you to turn your cell phones to silent or vibrate, and then let's all stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. City Clerk Chris, would you take the roll, please?
Councilmember Stevens. Councilmember Myers.
Here.
Councilmember Berg.
Here.
Councilmember Dalby.
Here.
Councilmember Rowe.
Here.
Mayor Lazio.
Here. Need a motion for approval of tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Councilmember Myers.
Yes.
Councilmember Berg.
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe.
Yes.
We have on our agenda identification of citizens who would like to comment on any item on the agenda, and we'll still do that. But I think in terms of tonight's presentation, we'd really like to have our guest make her comments, and then we'll enter into a little bit more of a relaxed, free-flowing type of discussion. If you're all comfortable with that, then we can still wrap up with some public comments at the end too. So tonight I would invite City Administrator Phil to give us a little background on the work session and introduce our guests.
All right. Thank you, Honorable Mayor. So we have been working on trying to reinstitute a Human Rights Commission or Civil Rights Commission for about 8 months now, I think, is something we've been kind of talking about. And you and I had started meeting back about 6 months ago with people that were interested in that concept, and fairly regular meetings. We had actually, Monica had sat in on one of those meetings and provided some information to the group, and got, I'd say, a little bit to an impasse as to which direction it would go. Would it be more along the lines of the Human Rights Commission, or more along the lines of a Civil Rights Commission? And so I thought it'd be a good idea to have Monica come do some presentation, have the group that we've been working with invited as well to offer their thoughts and suggestions. Ultimately, it would be a council decision as to what we do in creating an ordinance. If we establish a group, what is that going to look like? And so thought tonight would be a good opportunity. Monica has put together an outline for kind of how we can hopefully move past and get the roadmap for what the group will look like. And it may change over time, but what is our ultimate goal going to be? I'm just saying, scroll up here. So, what are our goals going to be, and where are we falling short of what those goals are, either today or into the future? And so I think if we can leave tonight with a little better clarity, we'll be in a better position, and then develop everything else from that point.
Okay.
So, and I guess I will turn it over to Monica if you wanted to give a brief introduction of your credentials and go into tonight's session.
Excuse me, I'm Monica Stone, and you all can hear me? Okay, wonderful. So Monica Stone, I am the Deputy Director for the Iowa Department of Human Rights. And so what that means is I get to work across all 3 of the divisions within the Department of Human Rights, as well as work very closely with the 7 offices that we have at the state for underserved populations. So our first division is Community Action Agencies. Here in Ottumwa, the CEDA Community Action Agency is part of our Community Action Agency network. We really sponsor a lot of the anti-poverty programming that the Community Action Agencies deliver throughout the entire state. We're also the home of the state's Criminal and Juvenile Justice Planning Entity, which is the organization in the state that houses most of the state's data for justice, both criminal justice and juvenile justice, Our joke is that if you get pulled over and get a speeding ticket, we know it before the person hands it to you in your car. But we don't spend our time with that necessarily. What we really look at is how we can improve the justice system, reduce the number of children going into the juvenile justice system, and also deal with disproportionality within the system as a whole. And then within human rights, most people think of the offices that we have for underserved population. The state has created 7 offices. Those include the Office of Persons with Disabilities, Native American Affairs, Deaf Services, Latino Affairs, Status of Women, Status of African Americans, and Asian and Pacific Islander Affairs. That by no means covers all of the populations that are underserved or underrepresented in Iowa. And so as I tell people, if you didn't hear what your need encompasses within those 7 offices, still give us a call. We're the people who are here to be your advocates and the people who are in the state to provide access to government for people who need those sorts of services. In our advocacy, some of the most important work that we offer is unbiased data. And so for cities like Ottumwa and for people who live in Ottumwa, one of the places you can come is our office to understand what's happening for people from an unbiased, real news perspective. We also include real emphasis on civic engagement, and this will be my commercial. If you go to the website talentbank.iowa.gov, that gives you the opportunity to apply for any board or commission that the state has to offer. Our goal is to help Iowa's representation in appointed boards and commissions, maybe elected boards and commissions in the future, represent Iowans. And today, that's true in some places and not true in others. And so our goal is to really increase that representation and decision-making. We also offer a lot of youth leadership initiatives. I mentioned earlier, trying to reduce the number of children going into the juvenile justice system, but also helping children see themselves as leaders and understand how to use that leadership potential. We also provide a lot of language access programming. During COVID is a great example of the work that was so important in language access. As people needed information to keep themselves safe and keep themselves healthy, providing information in a way they understood in a language that made sense to them was incredibly important. I'll also tell you, as someone who's worked in government most of her life, that sometimes bureaucrats are really good at creating their own language. And so we also try to unbureaucrat a lot of language for people. So language access isn't just other recognized languages, it's also making plain language information available to people. In addition to the work of the Department of Human Rights, the state also has a commission on civil rights. So the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, it takes us from the education, information, data, programming, advocacy side of things to the law enforcement. So what happens when our good work doesn't result in good actions? And so the Iowa Civil Rights Commission is Iowa's neutral fact-finding law enforcement agency around civil rights. The Civil Rights Commission is available for every Iowan to file, to put information into them and see what that means from a law enforcement perspective. They have the goal to end discrimination within the state of Iowa, and in collaboration with us, I hope we see that happen. But because that goal hasn't been achieved yet, the Civil Rights Act does need to be enforced, and the Civil Rights Commission does that work. You can look online to understand more about the very specific areas in which the Iowa Civil Rights Commission provides protection, but they provide protection primarily in the federal civil rights areas around employment discrimination, disabilities, and fair housing. And in addition to that, in all of the protected classes that Iowa law recognizes, which include also employment, housing, public accommodation, education and credit, in the areas of age, color, creed, familial status, gender identity, marital status, mental disability, national origin, physical disability, race, religion, retaliation, sex, and sexual orientation. And for those of you that went by a little too fast, I do have a handout that has all of this information available for you if you want to refer to it. And it also includes some links to really good information about both of our agencies. As we were talking with some of the folks from here in Ottumwa, what I understood was that there was a need to look at some different options for how you dealt with human rights, civil rights, and just in general, ensuring a comfortable environment for all citizens in Ottumwa. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about those three models, some of which are used in other cities here in Iowa, certainly other cities across the nation. But it's not unusual for a city to have a purely human rights organization that does things very similarly to what our agency at the state level does, which is ensuring access to government, providing advocacy for individuals, and creating system change. And so when I talk about all of the data that we offer to people, the intention behind that data is to examine the systems that are in place and see where they break down in terms of protecting people's human rights, and then create change in those so that everyone benefits from those system changes and you can move forward. Some cities offer just civil rights, and so just that law enforcement side of the equation. But many cities offer a hybrid. And across the nation, many cities, as they start examining what happens in human rights, civil rights, and in their city, start somewhere. They pick a place to start, and they say, we're going to put our emphasis on either human rights or civil rights to get started, and then we're going to move along a continuum that's planned and intentional. And so those hybrid systems often start with system change, expand into civil rights, the law enforcement side of things, and then can move on to other areas as well, education, and other sorts of economic development even in some cases across the country. In Iowa, we're lucky that we have both a state support system for both human rights and civil rights. Many states do not offer the same human rights support system. Many states only offer the law enforcement support system. So the nice thing for here in Iowa is that we have the opportunity for cities to take advantage of both. With that, I'm going to stop for a minute and see if any of the council members or anyone else has any questions I can answer. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. Again, seriously, but when you mention underserved, is there criteria? Is it just minorities, or you mentioned all the categories, but so underserved, what exactly is that?
That's a great question. There are so many terms that people throw out there. Minority is one, underserved, underrepresented, disenfranchised. I think, we could probably make a long list of what all those terms are. For me, what it means is someone who doesn't know how to access the resources that will help them be prosperous in whatever way they define their own prosperity. And so that could be a disability. It could be hearing loss. It could be poverty. It could be connection to the criminal and juvenile justice system. It could be race, ethnicity, gender identity. We could, the list can go on. But hopefully that answers your question.
I was wondering if, I know I've went through and looked at a lot of cities and how they're doing this. Is there, seem to be in a community our size, one way that seems more prevalent than another, both just in how they're operating now or how they got started?
Sure, that's a great question. So cities of a certain size here in Iowa, 29,000 in population, do have some responsibilities around law enforcement and civil rights. So cities that don't meet that population threshold generally start with system change. So more on that human rights, if we're going to create those categories, human rights side of things. So the advocacy system change side of the equation, to learn what needs to happen in the community and where the issues exist. And they set a time frame for examining when to move forward into that law enforcement period of time. They also create intentional relationships with their state civil rights organization, so that there's great communication between the city and the state civil rights entity, so that those issues of law enforcement don't get lost in the mix between local and state, particularly when there's an intention to move forward with an enforcement side at some point.
So if you're looking at the education piece, information being the prevalent area that some communities our size are starting out into, obviously in order to do that, to build the capacity that we need to really launch it, that's not for free. So how have these communities launched those programs? How have they funded it? Is it through grant programs? Is it through city budgets? How's that work?
I think you named the two big ones. Certainly there are opportunities to receive grants for this kind of work, and the opportunities for that have increased in the last little bit of time. Many cities do budget either staff and other resources to human rights and human rights education. Some partner with the other governmental, political subdivisions, governmental entities in their area. So perhaps a school and a city might choose to partner in delivering some of those services as well. But yes, it does take people power to make any of these organizations work. I would say that in our organization at the state level, we have 50 full-time staff members who are full-time paid employees, and we have 106 volunteer commissioners. So that balance of both is really important to get the voice of the people who are impacted by the decisions, as well as staff members whose everyday work is to pay attention to this initiative.
I had a quick question too. You mentioned a lot of the things that the local organizations are responsible for, or can be, like access to government, advocacy, bringing about change, education, and definitely important communication between the state and local commission. First of all, I'm just kind of curious to know how many cities that are under 29,000 go ahead and establish these types of commissions, and in your opinion, have they been a help to the state, a help to the local area that they serve, and as far as representation, and are they working well from what you can tell at the state level?
I wish I had an answer to tell you this is exactly how many cities in Iowa have a human rights commission who don't meet that population threshold, but I'm going to find out.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and I'll let
no
you
problem.
know. So the cities who have a human rights organization who do this kind of information education, there is an association in the state that they all belong to, both the civil rights entities and the human rights entities. And they meet regularly. We're connected with them as well. So how we use that kind of statewide network is really to understand what's happening throughout the state. Every part of the state has a different experience in terms of population growth, in terms of the economic development that they've experienced, and have different human rights needs. And so we have the great opportunity in that network to learn more about the specific local needs to inform our work at the state level, and then also to create programming or resources that would be applicable for multiple jurisdictions, so that we don't have to do things 13 times. We can do it once, and then 13 cities can use that. So the network is really valuable to us, and I hope it's valuable to the cities as well.
I have one question, somewhat as a follow-up to Councilperson Dalby. How do you, in the communities where you have these organizations, how do you measure the success over the long term? I mean, sure, anecdotally, we can say, you know, we have less reports, but how do you, I mean, having less reports doesn't mean it's a successful campaign. So how do you actually measure the success? Is there data available in these communities, or is it just, you know, we're hearing less about it?
Mm-hmm. So on the human rights side of things, we do have very specific measures that we look at, and we look at outcome measures. So how are the things that are important to the state and to a city moving forward? And then how does that vary by population? So we might look at indicators around education, employment, income, criminal justice, juvenile justice, social connectivity, all kinds of measures, and look at that population by population and in the aggregate to see where maybe there's an opportunity for improvement, or where there are discrepancies for different groups. So one example of that might be in the state as a whole. One of the things we look at is the number of people who believe they need two jobs per person per adult in their family or more in order to survive financially. Our goal is to reduce the number of families that feel like every adult in the household must have two jobs. In some cities, they might have a different perspective of that kind of employment. That might make sense in a particular city. So the data sometimes can be different depending on the different city and how those sorts of things work. So that's the human rights side of it. The civil rights side of it has a really robust tracking record, and everyone can view that on their website for complaints in different complaints by type, by population, by protected class in different regions. And I think that is helpful to see what's happening in the state, to understand where change needs to happen. We use that to create system change. So we look at that and say, there's a lot of employment discrimination in this region in this way that are found in cases. What kind of system change needs to happen in order to eliminate that for that particular area? So that's how we use the data.
And I feel like we're just in a line grilling your questions, but I have lots of questions. I was wondering, have you in recent years seen communities that have started with the human rights and moved to that hybrid model? I know you talked about a timeline of making that happen. Have you seen any case studies of what that looks like, or amount of time, or how has that evolved over time?
I haven't seen any trends that would make me say it always takes 3 years or anything like that, to give you a rule of thumb. I also think, to be very honest, what we've experienced in the last 2 years might create change in how we move forward with human rights and law enforcement, civil rights investigations over time. But I don't know exactly. When I say it creates change, I can't tell you my crystal ball says this is exactly what that change looks like. So whenever I do planning, whether it's on this kind of an issue or something else, I advise people to look at things in 6 month, 1 year, 5-year, and 10-year increments. And the reason for that is, if you can do a lot of really good work in 6 months, you're going to learn so much about your community that your 1 year, 5-year, and 10-year goals might change. And so if you are asking me as a planner what I would do, that's what I would do, is set goals in those kind of time increments moving forward, understanding that a year can be a long time in learning what needs to happen, and you might accelerate your timelines based on what you learn.
Thank you.
Any comments from anyone in the audience?
My name is Patty, and what type of supports do you offer to communities that are starting this process?
So Patty, this is really one of the first times that a city has directly reached out to us to say, would you be willing to work with us in setting this up? And so I can stand here today and say, I would love to have our office work with the city of Ottumwa to say, here's how we would do this for other cities. And these are the kind of things that are important as the city moves forward. And we would learn together what are the kind of supports that are needed in cities. Because today, I think we need to learn together what we provide. I wish I could say, here's exactly what it looks like, but I think we would have to use an iterative process.
Go back to the question, we used to have a civil rights commission come on, and I don't know if there was even at that time, so that's what it's like that, just want to make sure that we do sustainable, so we'll allow body to, so it's here in the future, we'll start.
Yeah, and anytime, I mean, I've worked in government for a really long time. I guess as long as many of you have been alive. So what I would say is it's really easy to create something that doesn't last. And it's really important when you're thinking about government to create something that is flexible and sustainable so that it lives forever in whatever form it needs to be in the future. If we were in Ottumwa, I've lived in Iowa longer too. The Ottumwa 20 years ago was a different city. And so he said, I always want everything to be the way it was 20 years ago. That would be what you would consider. And so this is a great opportunity to build something that's not
How does that interface with interact with the state? We have to keep our registered
So when someone files a case, if you had local enforcement, they could either choose to file that at the state level or file it locally. And then at that point, either jurisdiction would be the responsible party to move it forward. So there really wouldn't necessarily be an automatic connection between the two. And every citizen in Ottumwa has the resources of the Iowa Civil Rights Commission today. If you had your own law enforcement, they could still go to the state for enforcement as well. So that avenue wouldn't disappear for them. But often at the Civil Rights Commission, if you did have your local enforcement entity, they would ask about the relationship, the reason why you might choose not to work locally. But there would be two separate.
and essentially two separate ways people have to kind of conclude the investigation.
Under the law, yeah.
Obviously, we have resources.
That made me think, Lorraine's question made me think of the other question I had. When it comes to the civil rights section or side of things, I'm assuming then the local commission would have particular trainings and requirements to meet on a yearly or so basis.
Yes, and the State Civil Rights Commission does offer training and resources, both in education and information, because they do a lot of that too, and on the format process side of things.
And going back to Lorraine's question, when you're looking at the civil rights piece of this and you're having the local side and the state side, is there any advantage to having a local civil rights commission if there's already the state that's doing it? I mean, do you gain or lose objectivity by having the local? Do you gain speed by having local? I mean, what's a real advantage to having a local civil rights commission if there's already that piece at the state
At the state
level?
level. I think generally speaking, what I would say is that the speed with which an issue might be addressed could be a factor. Currently, and I think in some of the handout information that I pulled from the civil rights website, they received a little over 1,700 complaints and closed 1,300 complaints in the last year. So that leaves a few out there that haven't been closed yet. And so that's everything that's received within a year of how many they get in and how many they settle or close. And so that necessarily means that they have to happen in a particular order when they come in. But it's really hard to know what the distinct advantage would be of one over the other.
And as follow up to that, if somebody does file a local civil rights complaint and they're not happy with that, is there an appeal process that goes to the state past that?
There's not necessarily an automatic appeal process that would go to the state, but there is the possibility that the state could take the case.
If I may, past history, I was on the council back in the day when we did drop the Civil Rights Commission, and there were reasons for doing that. One of which, and maybe you've already answered it, maybe the civil rights law is better defined now. But to Mark's question and a couple of these comments, back then, if something came to our local Civil Rights Commission, then it could be taken to the state, and the state would be the one that actually acted on it. So then the redundancy meant, why do we even do that at our local level when the state is going to be the one to make the decision? So has that changed?
I'm not aware of that process currently today, but I'm going to write that down. Charles Hill is the interim director for the Iowa Civil Rights Commission, and I'm going to confirm with Charles what that relationship is and let you know.
Well, and I'm just guessing that that's 16 years ago.
Yeah.
And so the
Things have
law
changed.
then, I know we're slow sometimes, but sometimes as we improve, the law is more definitive now than maybe it was at the time.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think, Monica, when I called the Civil Rights Commission before Christmas and talked with the then director, I think we had in the last 5 years, and this is off of my memory, about 87 cases that had been processed by the Iowa Civil Rights, and I forget the exact number, but it was 70 some number of cases that were employment law. And so I think part of the issue back then, Councilman Myers, was that rather than have a specialist in employment law on staff, we referred a lot of those to the Iowa Civil Rights Commission. That was, now there were other things, housing and credit and education, but again, most of them were employment, as I recall.
Well, and Mayor Lazio, I think that lends itself to me being able to tell you that I'm not a commercial for the Iowa Civil Rights Commission by any means, but they do have a staff that does have attorneys who specialize in each of those areas and who specialize within the areas of protected class as well. And so these are people who every day their work is civil rights in the state of Iowa, and they're attorneys who spend their the entirety of their time and their work focused in this arena. And so there's a benefit to having that knowledge available to you, whether you have a local civil rights entity or not. That state resource is a very rich resource for you.
We don't have the statistics, but And so, because the commission was not involved at all, then it goes to the courts and law. Because that's my opinion, was 100% because of that.
I will find out that information. They do, and I'll get back with you, they do also have an annual report on their website. And I don't remember how many years of annual reports they have available on their site, but it does offer that kind of information as well. But I'll pull that out of there.
For me, that doesn't feel like a resolution at all. I shouldn't say that. That's just basically nobody really anything. I mean, still a benefit.
So you mentioned the attorneys that work with the state commission. Is that any of those good resources? I don't know, resources made available to local commissions and they can ask for help on those things, or is that an advantage of the city commission?
You know, I think the answer is, I know informally the staff at the ICRC would help me with the questions that they have. Is there a formal process between local authorities and the state for creating those connections? I don't know the answer to that. But that's also something that I can ask them about the specific process. But I know the folks who work there, and there are people who want civil rights to happen. I mean, they live by they want to end discrimination. And so they offer that resource personally, even if they're not a class.
So I don't know if this is right, I'm going to say this, but so one of the questions we kind of been running into is what is the city wants to see, like the people in the home wants to see. We did create a survey, we distributed it in Michigan, Spanish, and we should have done a better job to get it out, but we did get 71 results for that. And so 97% of those, so 69 people, came out and said that they do want this human rights commission. And of those 71 people, 92%, because we asked them, what do you want to see in this? We want it to be investigation, we want it to be educational, we want it to be systematic, we want it to be everything or nothing. And 92%, so 65 people who did in fact said, we want to see all of that. We want this hybrid method, and is what we would call. To 3 people said educational, 1 person said investigate, 1 systematic, and 1 said if they were looking at this, no. I mean, granted, we haven't had that survey out as long, but I imagine we'll continue to get more results. And we share that information. And the survey was just great, just 3 people. So that's a really good response for just get just 3 days. And I had to bring graphs and stuff, but you know, we're going to print them off. It's well done. In terms of complaints, from what I've read from other cities, is that it doesn't necessarily end up in the courts, right? If there's a complaint, you can have that crucial conversation with those 2 parties and try to find a resolution. So that way, both locally and state could save money. I know, like in 2 years ago, we had a local employer who was people from Texas here with a contract saying that when you buy housing, you buy this, but once the people got here, their housing was not suitable for people to live there. They weren't paid as promised, and the legal American citizens here locally assisted with the way the legal have those conversations with the employer, and we were able to manage where to pay the individuals, and then the rest of the housing part of it. So it didn't necessarily go all the way to the courts. So it, I mean, at the end, you could be saving money.
The mediation process is incredibly valuable, and I won't even pretend to know that what the percentage is of how many cases come to the civil rights organization or even other enforcement entities in the state, because they're not the only ones, that mediation resolves the issue and actually changes this situation, just as you described, change the employment situation for people, not just those who brought the complaint forward, but for everyone. And so that mediation element, to me, is incredibly important, because my bias is it's the people who don't speak up who need protection. So now you know my bias. But that process is super helpful.
That's where I see the value of whichever way we go. So right now, the question is, what happens when we don't have a human or civil rights commission? And the answer is probably all the cracks, or what we know happens is that they go to petty. It's a burden of petty. We had a case a few months ago, and that person had taken the lead on trying to help solve the issue. I had one last night. It's really creates a burden on the citizens that don't have to manage, don't have support, that they have to hire as support. So if they get to somebody who can listen and help them, or otherwise they might just stay there, and then the depression or the condition continues to next person. So that's where I see a lot of value in that approach. Just like any other commission would address the communities. So the question is, what happens if you don't have it?
So for those folks who find us at the Department of Human Rights, they get that kind of navigation service. And so if they were to call our agency, that's what we do. We help people navigate what systems in government can assist with what the problem is that they have. And if we find that they have a complaint that does need enforcement, that's when we connect them with the Civil Rights Commission. The challenge is those folks who can't find outside navigators. And so local navigators can be incredibly valuable in a community. The people who understand how you access the systems of government, what are the services that are available to you, and where can you get them at the local level, at the state level, at the county level. What's that whole, the whole menu? I often talk about it like a layer cake, because I like cake. But the idea is most people probably come to you with something specific. And you talk to them and you find out that there's another layer and another layer and another layer. And it's really a system access issue and an understanding of what their rights are and where they go to get resources. And so if you have someone who can say, here's the path, and when you run into barriers, call me back and I'll help, and here's the path. That matters. That matters to Iowans. And it solves system issues, because once you see what those layers look like, you can start saying, there's always a bottleneck, this layer. So let's fix this layer. And that's important work for government, in my opinion, and it's work that we do at the Department of Human Rights and help cities do as well.
Another question, one of the things that I struggle with, in the organization, is building, helping throughout education, very comprehensive and legal for people that don't have rights or so we have this human and civil rights law commission to help build the state application, or is that
That's really part of the decision for how you set up the charter or the code or the ordinances for the organization, what you include in there. If you're an assistance provider, or I'll use the word navigator often, if you're an assistance provider, that gives you a lot more leeway to say, let me help you do this, let me talk you through this. If you're doing it, if you're helping someone who might be blindly assistant, you can fill that enforcement role, you do have to have kind of a firewall between who fills out the form and who enforces the information. So there's that. But as an assistance provider, you just have to identify it.
Any questions?
Well, number 2.
Okay, round 2. My approximately minutes are a little approximately off, but that's okay. So the next area that I thought was really important is to take inventory of what initiatives are underway locally. What are you most proud of in terms of the work that you've done in diversity, equity, and inclusion here in Ottumwa? And then take a minute to say, yeah, this kind of work really knocks it out of the park and we'd love to do more. Or we did this, it may not have been the best thing we did. And so we can get rid of that. Or what's working right now and we don't want to change anything. We think it's fabulous. And so maybe this is an opportunity for a little bit of just brainstorming of saying, you know, these are the things we're doing. No judgment at this point, no A, B, or no 1, 2, or 3, but just, you know, speaking out about what things are underway.
Well, I think one to start, we just finished our comprehensive plan and we had a lot of public input and there was a lot of referencing of how do we celebrate our diversity and to keep that in the comprehensive plan and to act on it. So we're not just celebrating a day, but that we have an attitude of this should be a year-round process that we celebrate, whether it's Asian Pacific or whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever it happens to be, that we appreciate the contribution that different populations have made in our community. And we are a very diverse community. You know, I think that we've seen the demographics change considerably in the last 16 years. So.
What else?
We did a city proclamation for LGBTQ recently. I think that's a step in the right direction.
I'm gonna say it's not, you know, the city doing it, but as a community, having our partners like LULAC and other organizations that are doing things like the Juneteenth celebration and Viva Ottumwa and those things that are really starting to become more at the forefront in our community. And having, as Monica and I were talking beforehand on 20% of the people doing 80% of the work, and a lot of those are behind you right now. So, yeah, that's part of the 20. So, but yeah, having those partners and those relationships and people working hard to bring those things to our community.
I've tried to reach out to a variety of different people for our boards and commissions. We have openings currently on several different groups, and it just seems harder to get volunteers right now. People are really busy, but we have reached out to some specific populations, and I think if we can do that and continue to do that, we would enhance the community attitude about we're open to involving variety of personnel, you know, whether it's again Latino, because we have a large Latino population, but we have some other fairly large populations that are not represented, you know, so.
I liked earlier the comment, the mediation, and I have not been directly involved in a lot of these types of things the last several years, but that strikes me as a key, that whatever we do here, that be a big part of it, because I think if you have the channels to mediate, to have the conversation, you can correct a lot of things at that level. So I'd sure like to see that be a big part of it.
Another thing, we've early thought too, but we've got to get more youth involvement. And I think that's again, both in whether we have a youth representative to the council or on some of our boards and commissions. I think that would be a real step in the right direction.
I was gonna say Zach could speak better to the RISE grant and the work that's going on there of something that we've begun doing.
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
The AmeriCorps Refugee Rise program, we're hosting that this year. For the first time, we kind of learned a few things. One is that it's tough. I think the city staff, we don't have people who do social service programming day to day. Supervisors, AmeriCorps members, we're supposed to be doing social service work. It's hard. And so one thing that's kind of come up is the possibility of JPS and some of the folks that they have on their human resources team taking that over next year in the city might be good. Maybe, you know, we're successful getting it off the ground. But maybe the city's not the lead agent. We've had 3 different people throughout this year. We have 2 right now.
And this may reflect a recent experience, but I think we've got to figure out how to work more closely with our mental health system. We all are kind of chuckling. We had a recent situation that we encountered, and I felt like I became a navigator.
You know, just as an observation here, and it may be totally off the mark, but it seems like to me that we have more than, you know, like you said, several ethnic groups in Ottumwa, and I think a lot of them are underrepresented, and I don't think a lot of people totally know the background of a lot of these folks. It would be nice to see this commission, if it gets established, reach out and have those, you know, different folks, you know, kind of, you know, get together, organize, and bring their perspective to the commission so that everybody is represented. Because I think you're right there. It seems to me that there could be a lot of underrepresented individuals in the community, just from what I've seen.
I think the biggest thing here that, in looking at all of those, that seems to be missing is really the point of the discriminatory behavior really comes down to the people that aren't of those protected classes. So really, if we're going to have any initiatives that are going to really work in the long term, using Emar's word sustainability, we really need to have educational outreach, not for the youth, not for the people that are of those classes, but the white people. I'd just go ahead and say it, for the white people in the community, because those are the people that are committing this behavior anyway.
I want to kind of add to that as I'm sitting here and listening to everybody talking, and you asked the question about the good that we've done. We've talked about the good that we've done. We've heard nothing from our guests. And so my concern is, Mark, to your point, we've heard from the white people. Let's hear from other people. Let's ask other people, what is the good that we've done? Because while we may see that, we're on a completely different side than what our guests are on. And so my concern sitting here in my role is we're not asking the people. We have our ideas and we have our perceptions. We need to hear their perceptions as well.
But they are the public relations efforts. I appreciate all these things that you do. But when I look at what are existing, the question is existing local, diversity of the inclusion stuff. And the government entities that reached out to us. But beyond that, I guess, the active outreach with the boards, that's good. But all of this stuff kind of comes from initiatives from people outside of the city. And I think, and that's good, we're part of the city. We're all, y'all are responsible for making this benefits for it. I recognize that. What we are asking collectively is that the city do more to make people feel included. And just even establishing a commission, not a place where people go, they feel that they're done on. You know, this advertising, having it available, I think it goes so far, regardless of what all the details are, I really enough. I just think we need to, the city, I would like to see the city, as an entity step up. The city is important, and people of color are community important. And so that's where because there is a lot of stuff, but you know, the price is the bill price has come to the council. You guys have said anything about pricing? If you had been asked to come over to the museum celebrations and another going to the go to council, have had anything on their own. That's all. This is awareness is bigger than reading questions.
And along with that, I agree with her, it's the intentional outreach, right? Get to know your constituents, like finding out what the real issues, and I think you explained it very well, Monica, and that human rights in the initial cases is getting to know what the issues are, especially for Black and people of color. So I think it's, like you said, Lorraine, is doing that intentional outreach, building that rapport with those communities, and then understand, hearing what their issues are. That's when the Human Rights Commission was established, and all was the chair, and the Human Rights Commission took lead in the international festival. And all passed away, and that faded. The city of Ottumwa did not take over it. So another organization took the festival to celebrate diversity. Why did, my question would be like, why did that change? Why is the city of Ottumwa not involved in that festival, aside from invitation and a presence there?
Well, I would also come on board, Mr. Robinson, too, about how, the commission is created, that the commission really do like that intentional outreach to our underserved population, which we should be. But also, how can the council, how can the city do that intentional outreach themselves too? You know, how can our police, how can our firefighters, how can, city entities do that? Yeah, leadership, I guess. We're all here, we're doing a partnership, and we want partnership and leadership, and I think there's just so much we can do, work together. And this is the start, for sure. But that's kind of how I see it when we look at it, when you look at the platform. It's kind of driven by outside of the village. And maybe that's personal perspective. Let's do that.
You know, if I may though, I've got to tell you, I am a white person and I don't apologize for it. I'm proud to be. I have lived in this city for 40 years and I have seen amazing improvements in things. As this was developing over the last couple of years, a former student that's middle-aged, young Black man, and I asked him, growing up, going through our school system and everything, how do you think you were treated? And he said, really good. And one point he made to me was, Bob, the main thing for me is I observed that if you're willing to work, you'll do fine. So then I asked a businessman, an older gentleman, a Black man, and I asked him, as you've served here and everything else, and he said the same thing. He said, Bob, I think I have the advantages of anybody, color-wise, as long as I'm willing to work and do my job. So it does concern me a little bit that when we talk about, and I asked for that definition of underserved, and again, I'll go back to your term on mediation, because I think that's the thing. Somehow in there, I'm not going to apologize for being white. And by the way, the majority of the people in Ottumwa are. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I think the highest percentage of us want to work with underserved, want to work with minorities, but how do we do it? It's a two-way street. You can't always be a victim. Sometimes you have to step forward too. And as the mayor said, when we asked for people to serve on different committees and everything, then somehow we've got to encourage people from different areas to step up and get involved. I didn't mean to offend anybody, so I hope I didn't, but that's how I feel.
Sure, it's not going to anybody or anybody else. I think we're looking at data that shows that underrepresented groups are not at the same level as everybody else. And, I think we have good success stories of people from underrepresented groups in the community here. I had one last night, and that's not the case. The recent incidents and the recent sexual orientation. So this is the youth in our community. So I think as long as we keep having those things happen, it's a journey. We can never say we're done because somebody else had a wonderful life. We should say it's done for everybody. So I think when I'm coming, and hopefully that's the message that we have sent to anybody, is that we don't want anybody to apologize for who they are, and that we're learning together, and still learning in our journey of equity and inclusion. So I hope that that's a message that we're sending out and clear. And in fact, our organizations are inclusive. We have white members in our local Black youth. We have the Black youth, Black board. We have membership in the youth who are not Latino. So we are inclusive in that. Hopefully, we're the same. We want to be better for
And I will say, constant, I do present that they just said the victims that the style that people were not to be playing the victim because I do not see people that are underrepresented as victims. It's just that systems were built so that people don't have access to certain resources to them. And so it's not necessarily playing victim, things that people don't have access to these resources or information.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Patty, and I think that's one of the things I said at the Juneteenth meeting. I think I had a pretty decent education, but we were not given a lot of the good information. And there are definitely groups of people who have been underserved, had limited access, and were mistreated in our history. And I think that's something that we're just now talking about very openly. So I think there's a lot of education and awareness that we can help our community to understand. And I agree with Emar. We don't want to apologize for who we are. We are all people. We're all human. We all bleed red. And, we really want to do what's best for our community and for the state. And I think this kind of a discussion gets some of that out in the open that we haven't talked about before. We've never had an open session with the community about this before, to my knowledge. So I think it is a step in the right direction.
Here, I just want to make a quick comment just to clarify something here. So I feel better getting it out. I think over the past many years, and I think, Ed Ball and the commission, that was before my time, but I'm sure they did a great job in doing what they needed to do at the time. What I see though is the city not, we're not doing enough. We're not doing what we could possibly be doing. At the same time, we need guidance to know that. We need it. We're accepting of it. We're reaching out. At least I am. I want to know. I want to learn. I want to, what can we do better? We are the ones that are underachieving, I think, in this situation. But we also got to remember that we also, like I said, need that guidance. This has got to be a collective effort. And I'm glad to see people willing to come here and tell us what we need to do better. I'd like to be able to do everything correctly and go out there and say, here's what we need to do. We should have done this. But we have to have that input so we know too. So, we're not born, obviously we're elected officials. We certainly aren't born perfect and we can't, predict what we have to do. So I'm actually really looking forward to this moving forward so we can learn and start achieving what we should be doing, and getting out and reaching out to those folks because we are one community again. And it was nice to see that, take place again. So please help us too at the same time.
Can I just go back to but then there are people that you are talking about, I mean, I think we all about stories too about people who have had pretty significant, grievances too, and I would say that our youth are experiencing it a lot right now. I mean, I know of like some LGBTQ plus youth that are really experiencing, some, discrimination and attacks in our community.
I was really appalled when we had the last diversity meeting, and it was an Asian woman who came to the group and shared her experiences. And again, charming senior citizen who just was minding her own business and was accosted on our streets. And I think it was an eye-opener for a lot of us who just take for granted that we don't think about that unless we're really aware of what happened. And so she shared her story, and I think that's given us a sensitivity and a better understanding of how our community does react sometimes. And like Matt said, we're not perfect, but we're learning from some of those experiences.
There's a big difference too, I think, between people who've grown up here and so they know people, and they're listening to people, and so they kind of experience it, like kind of this is wonderful. We have so many different that we can use. And I've traveled so far in the country, and it's very hard. I know what if something happens here, and we're going to who's like the end of is there anybody else? And I think that when we have people who come into the community that did grow up, those experiences are going to be fun, and people who know where things are, and know who they are.
I've obviously offended some of you some, and for me to explain or share my opinion, that's me, just as you do. I agree with everything you guys have just repeated and said, but I'm with Matt also. I really liked when the group came up with the one Ottumwa, because I believe that we should be one Ottumwa. So I'm not against the efforts here at all, but I just have to share with you when things are said how I feel too.
This is actually, thank you for letting me listen and understand where you are, because you did a great job of actually answering number 2 without realizing the word. Perhaps. But what I heard, what do we want to do more of? I think we might all be in agreement that we want to do more leadership. I think we might all be in agreement that we want all of the people who live in Ottumwa to feel like they have access to the resources to be successful. So tell me if I get these wrong, because I'm just repeating back what I heard. I heard that you want Ottumwa, the people who live in Ottumwa, to be inclusive of the people who've lived here for a long time, and the people who come here tomorrow, the new folks, and the people who might live a life that's different than yours, whatever that means. I heard that you want your community to be safe, in all of the meanings of safe. That you want people to feel comfortable, confident, and also physically safe. That you want equity. It's not that everybody's equal all the time for everything, but that you want people to have access to the resources to get the outcomes that mean their lives are good for them. Not my definition or anyone else's definition of what's good, but their definition. And that you want that probably yesterday. But you want to start today, but that you have a real focus on what happens to the young people growing up, and that you want them to have all of this and be able to be full circles of leaders who bring this into the next period of time.
right, Ottumwa? What else? What else do you want? Sorry, I moved on. Talking about what is supposed to be a Ottumwa.
Moving on to 3.
Yeah, sorry.
All right.
We did. She did such a great job of talking through what was good, what didn't work, and what you wanted to keep the same. If that.
The mayor said we want to involve our citizens of color, yeah, so that's, we need to do that. And then how can we say that, well, I think we want partnership too. We want it to be, I keep hearing this one at someone who will try to take from something else that are useful and anything. Not that he's like, I keep hearing so they didn't do all of it, all that comes with partnerships and collaboration and all of that. We want to truly lift up that purpose and be able to say we're going to. You want the city to have a leadership role. You want that leadership role to be informed by the partners in the community, that good organizations, but also that I don't know the word. Yeah, so you explain it so well.
Okay. This sounds like a great place to live.
I would say, Kara had mentioned, I think it's important to put in something specifically about the youth knowing the survey results that Kara and I were working on the number of youth that are being discriminated against and facing that what is a daily basis. So I think putting something in that talks about allowing all youth to flourish or thrive. I like both those words.
I'd second that too. That seems to be, in my mind, a limited amount of mind, that seems to be something when young people experience this type of discrimination and these practices. I can only imagine that would be much harder to deal with at that age level than it would be someone who's got some, time and has lived through some experiences. And having kids, in school myself, I'd like to see an emphasis on that, or somehow, I know there's places where they can go if they feel like they've been discriminated, but something, and that's not really a leadership role for the city council, but something maybe with the commission, there could be some outreach there, and if there's issues, to have somebody to contact directly, as soon as the issue happens, before it leads to something catastrophic. So yeah, I would second that too, Holly.
And gender-based violence.
What was it?
End of gender-based violence. Sexual assault and domestic violence.
Gender-based?
I don't know all.
I would support you on that, Lorraine, and also say that we are working at educating our community about some of the human trafficking issues. And that certainly is an area that I don't think any of us are fully knowledgeable of unless you've had that experience, because it is so subtle and so pervasive here in the state of Iowa as well as across the country. And I think that's something we need to learn more about. I'm proud of the fact that the Rotary Club here in town has had 2 trainings on human trafficking. And, talk about generally, and if I can say this and not be criticized for it, good old white boys club, didn't understand how serious an issue this was. But now that we have started to dig into a little bit, It's really something that has opened our eyes as a group of people, and we have men and women in the club now, but it certainly has opened our eyes about what's going on our interstates and in some of our cities.
Yes, I appreciate the very answer, price tag. But I heard that, I don't know about it. But that's good.
Yeah, that's good.
The other thing is, we can't forget though, is the intersectionality of that. When we're talking about immigrants, we're talking about human trafficking, it's not always sexual trafficking. There are slaves, there are people who are brought here and forced to work in order, we're threatened to be sent back to the country. They're not paid a wage, they work 20 hours a day and get to sleep for a while and they're home that, maybe with other people might be here. The crisis center in Ottumwa and the surrounding counties, we deal with human trafficking victims on a regular basis. So this is happening here, not just on the interstate in Des Moines. And it is more than just the sexual trafficking of children. It's also the intersectionality with immigrants.
If I may, employment trafficking is actually a bigger issue, not necessarily in terms of transportation across the state, but in terms of the people who end up here in Iowa. Our Attorney General's office and the Department of Transportation have phenomenal resources that would be available if the city wanted to move forward with anything.
I'll just throw it out there again. So Southeast Iowa Plaza and the Lawful Town Children's Alliance, so we just did a professional training where we helped us to keep 5 people there. More than community to bring, to take away the cinematic view of what trafficking is.
That's a pretty good list.
This is a pretty good list. I think a lot of people, I think your economic development issues would go away if this is what Ottumwa was, because everybody would want to live here. Or maybe they'd be worse. I don't know which way that goes.
Housing issues would be worse.
Housing issues. But I think we're ready to move on to what I think is often the rubber meets the road part. So we've talked about what's available at the state level and how those resources can serve you, what your different options are in terms of offering human and civil rights services here in Ottumwa and connecting with the state. We've talked about what's good, what needs to change, what we want to keep the same, what we want to do differently, and we've described the Ottumwa we all want to live in. And so we've also done a little bit in number 4 of talking about what needs to be newly created to achieve the goal. But I think that is probably the most important conversation to have next, is since we know all of that, we know from a big picture perspective what's available. We know what's happening and what needs to happen. We know where we want to go. What do you want to create to achieve the goal?
So, I know, like Emar and others have said, looking at that, achieving a goal, ensuring sustainability, to where I really like the idea of starting with I think most of what was on our list is education, advocacy, creating those connections, and really beginning there as a starting point of the development. And then, once we have our baseline and once we have some of those things started, then moving forward, investigating other avenues.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Going back to a question that I had asked earlier, and then to the point of sustainability, we look at what is quote unquote duplicated services. If we want to have something sustainable, we all know that the city of Ottumwa has limited. Creating a civil rights commission when that's already done at the state level seems to be something that we probably shouldn't be spending valuable resources on, when those resources could be spent towards more educational purposes through a human rights commission. That seems to me that would better goal for us, at least in the offset. We could change that down the road when we build capacity up, when we build buy-in from the community. That seems to be a smarter move in my opinion.
So then I go back to the survey again, 3 days, they have 71 people who say that they want to see help, they want to see that number. And I understand what you're saying, that is kind of saying too, but I do think that, please talk local, shop local, do everything local. People are more likely to go to local people with sensitive issues or, and I think DMAR also goes to like the fact that we comment on the difficulty of some of that people are too, so.
I guess with that being said, I thought that's why it was important to start first with this, because if we need local people to help them with that paperwork, those can't be the same people that are doing the civil rights aspect of it on a local
Which
level.
again complicates the whole project financially if you have additional people in that mix, at least at the human rights level.
My question is, there a budget analysis done, do we know what this would cost to do the civil rights commission rather than human rights? I mean, what dollar amount is there to that?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm just making the blind assumption that there's going to be additional cost to it. If we're talking about a civil rights commission, you had mentioned earlier that there was legal staff involved in it. So that's going to exponentially drive that cost up.
So I would also, I think reading your material, Monica, before today, and I thought, gee, why wouldn't we go for the hybrid model? But then listening to everybody and your points there, Mark, it's kind of like, but to establish, and back to EMAR and sustainable, and I think, Monica, back to you again, reading this material, this isn't going to happen overnight. If it takes 2 or 3 years, whatever it takes to do it, but to be sustainable, maybe we should start with the human rights part of it first to start getting these things going. And then as we learn, move on and maybe work toward the hybrid.
That's what I want to see, the civil rights portion happen, but I also don't want to set, I want to create a phased approach so that way we get going, we see what we need to do, and then ensure that it's a sustainable model. Talking to people who used to be on the commission in the past, one of the biggest struggles they said they had were getting people to remain or to join the commission because of the daunting amount of work for the civil rights portion of the commission. And so that was something that I thought was interesting, to where the trainings and the legal level of what they were seeing was very difficult to keep people long term. I know we've got lots of people now who are really eager, but I'm trying to think of that long term, to where we don't want in 20 years to be going down that same path again.
And that's actually, just to expand on that point just a little bit, this was mentioned earlier, we have a great community of volunteerism, but to what Holly just said, I think that we ask far too much of the people in this community that are willing to volunteer. If we're going to do this, we really need to do it right, and that might involve money. And we want to make sure that we're doing that piece of it to where we can fund it 2 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, instead of, once again, reaching out to people who are volunteering and putting so much on their plate that the thing just falls apart because nobody wants to take part in it anymore.
And I think there's a role, somebody mentioned partnership earlier. I think we might want to be talking with some of our partners, like the school system, the community college, and some other civic and religious organizations, because maybe we need to look at this as a community project rather than a city project. I just think there's some things that could be gained, and we might be able to share some costs and expenses and personnel.
Again, that's why I think starting and getting the ball rolling and creating our ordinance to where we have the commission and establishing it, and then having that commission then start the work of what it looks like to do those additional things in 2 years, 5 years, 1 year, if it's fast. Then having that commission established, and then we can draw from what we're learning with that new commission to expand from there.
So is there a way to put it in, see like an initiative? I don't know how this works, because I look down for about 4 years, 8 years down the road, there's a new city council. You know, they don't want to sit down and have these conversations. So I understand we're looking long term. I understand what you're saying too, but we all, you know, that's, well, this to be capacity aspects. My other question too, and I know that this is a city commission too, but you know, we are also county too, but there are ways that also involve the supervisors and get status with all of that.
I think that's a critical
That's a
piece,
great idea.
quite honestly.
Yeah, we got to keep in mind and remember that any council that comes along, just as we did when we, disbanded, I don't want to use that term, but, kind of put that on hold on the other commission. Any council can do that at any time, depending on the mix. We got an election coming up in November. Faces you see up here could change, at least in 2 or 3 positions dramatically. So that's definitely a critical piece, but it also goes to the advocacy part of getting people to vote and getting people and get the education piece out in the community, because it all happens here. You know what I'm saying? That's the end result of what we get out of this commission will, live or die at this bench. And so I guess I don't see, any reason. We certainly need to get started. I certainly appreciate the thinking this thing out well. And again, to Emar's point, make it sustainable, do it the right way, take some time. At the same time, it seems to me like we can do it, maybe a mixture of things. And when it comes to the heavy lifting, or where there's legal, need for legal services, to rely on the state for those services they already provide. I can't see why we can't partner with the state due to some of our budgetary issues. And this commission can do even mediation as far as the civil rights aspect, speeding up the issue, being the navigators, being the educators. And then if there's a complaint or something that comes in that's something that definitely needs looked at by an attorney or a legal point of view, then we rely on the state and file the claim there. I think there's a lot of things we can put meaningfully into this, over the course of time. But I think there's some meat we can put into. I don't see why we can't, keep the ball rolling. In other words, to get something established and get this off the ground. But I do want to do it right, and I want to make sure it's sustainable, and that we have buy-in, and that I do have a thing in my mind of how I see it working, and I hope it does. I won't be here when it comes to full fruition, but I think the only way to get to that point is to do it right. But I think there's certainly things we can't just say, oh, well, wait, in a couple of years we can look at this. There are some of those aspects, but there's maybe some more that we don't think we can do now, within the next year or so, and even mediation. I mean, that's my concern is too. However, we do it with the right structure. We have a process that we follow. We have really no processes in place to handle any of this. Another reason we can rely on the state for how they do it doesn't mean we have to wait on it. It just means we need to know the right process. Then we can take over from there, on the little stuff. So I think there's ways that we can work here and do something meaningful.
I also think, Matt, because what you're saying, and when we started this discussion for the most part of this evening, I hadn't thought at all about the county, or as the mayor said, the school district, Indian Hills, maybe corporate and other things. And boy, when you start getting them involved, then I think it's less likely that a council makeup could change a good program that is developed. So I sure like the inclusion of all these other, get it going, but make it broad.
So I think we have a direction, and we have some need for some additional information that you're going to send to Phil, and we'll disperse to our interested citizens. I just had a comment that we probably have violated one of our own rules, because we usually have people come to the microphone. People at home could not hear some of the comments from the audience. So in the future, we will ask you to come up to the microphone so that they can hear at home, because it does get hard to hear in these chambers. So
Wonderful. My apologies for having that.
I should have caught that too.
And this has been, thank you for having me be a part of your conversation. And our agency, I can commit our agency, is happy to help as you need it. So please rely on us, and to the extent that we can be helpful, And to the extent that we can connect in other state agencies, that's a big part of what we do.
I think, Phil, you've certainly got a direction from the council tonight and a sense of where they're at, so I think we can move forward with some, and with your help, we'll take advantage of the state resources. So, Patty, did you want to make a comment? Come up to the microphone so that,
Yeah.
now that I've said that, I can't.
Can't ring the bell.
Before we leave, I just want to make sure we get clarity as to what are the next steps, both for the city council and the community. What is it that we can get things done, just like that?
Who's going to tackle that? I think we will get some additional information from Monica. I think we'll draw on some of you folks in the audience and continue to meet and talk about some of this and set some timelines for ourselves. That would be reasonable to start.
Yeah, and one of the things I heard was we have some access to the state as far as, I was hearing general consensus of at least starting with Human Rights Commission, and maybe there's some way to work some other language in beyond that. Are you?
I don't know. I actually wrote down what I.
Perfect.
I'm not sure I understand. And your watch is talking.
I don't know why.
And we can see that this is what we all heard. So what I heard is that there's support for the idea of a Human and Civil Rights Commission, the hybrid model. That so what needs to happen first is that there's a plan that says, here's our process. And that plan includes how you build in navigation, how you build in government access, and how you build in listening into that first stage. Second stage is then taking that plan to partners, which include the state, county schools, community colleges, and potentially businesses. And that you identify the funding and sustainability options, both funding sustainability and process sustainability. And that in that plan is included a timeline that talks about what's going to happen sequentially to bring about both the human rights and civil rights hybrid model over time, and that you would assess those next steps and the speed at which those next steps would happen on a regular basis. My editorial addition to that was annually, but of course that would be part of the planning process. So that's what I heard as next steps.
That sounds like a very good summary. If you'll put that in, we can take and put your notes with Phil's notes and we'll combine those.
And Chris's.
And Chris's. Chris is our official recorder. So, any other comments, council, you want to make, or is there any other business that we should bring to the attention of the council? We've kind of, and I appreciate the very informal and friendly nature in which we've done this tonight. I think that's, you're to be complimented for that. Any other business for the city council? If there is none, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Councilmember Myers,
Yes.
Councilmember Berg,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby,
Yes.
Councilmember Rowe.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for participating. Item 704. Did a nice job, Monica.